The forest was quiet in the way remote forests often are, thick, padded silence broken only by small, precise sounds. Wind brushing needles high above. The occasional click of cooling branches. Something distant stepping carefully through leaves. Inside the tent, the nylon walls breathed softly with each shift of air. Mark lay on his back, staring at the faint grid of moonlight pressing through the fabric. The tent smelled like cold plastic, pine sap, and the damp earth they had flattened beneath it. Beside him, Leah shifted inside her sleeping bag. "Did you zip the door all the way?" she whispered. "Yeah," Mark said. "Why?" "I thought I heard it." The zipper pull hung exactly where he'd left it, tucked neatly into the corner seam. The forest outside exhaled. Cold air seeped under the rainfly and brushed across Mark's cheek. He closed his eyes again. They had hiked 6 miles off the logging road that afternoon, deeper than most campers bothered to go. The clearing they found was small and ringed with towering spruce. Moss swallowed the ground so thickly their boots barely made a sound. "Perfect," Leah had said. Now the silence felt heavier. Mark was drifting toward sleep when the zipper moved. It was quiet, almost polite. A soft metallic crawl. Zip. His eyes snapped open. Across the tent, the door flap sagged slightly inward. The zipper lowered halfway down. Leah lifted her head. "You heard it too?" she breathed. Mark propped himself on his elbows. "I didn't." The zipper slid again. Zip. The sound was unmistakable inside the thin nylon chamber. Cold air poured through the widening seam. "Did you open that earlier?" Leah asked. "No." They both stared at the door. The forest beyond the mesh window was dark but familiar. The pale columns of spruce trunks, the faint slope of the clearing, the dull shimmer of their extinguished fire ring. Everything exactly as it had been before they crawled inside. Mark swallowed. "Probably just tension on the zipper," he muttered. Leah didn't answer. Another inch. Zip. The door was now open enough for the night air to push the fabric inward like a slow breath. "Okay," Mark said quietly, forcing himself up. "I'll close it." He crawled across the tent, his knee pressing into the crinkling ground sheet. The air near the door was colder, sharper with the smell of wet moss and pine needles. He grabbed the zipper pull. It was icy. Mark tugged it upward. Zip. The door sealed shut again. He held the pull there for a moment. Nothing moved. Satisfied, he crawled back into his sleeping bag. Leah watched him. "See?" he said. "Just the wind." But the wind had stopped. Minutes passed. The forest outside was so still it felt like the whole mountain had paused. Then the zipper moved again. Slowly, deliberately. Zip. This time neither of them spoke. The door slid open from the top down until the triangular flap fell away. Cold air rushed in. But the forest outside wasn't the same. Mark sat up first. The clearing was gone. Instead of the familiar spruce trunks, enormous trees crowded just beyond the tent. Their bark was darker, almost black, and ridged in twisted folds like ancient scar tissue. The branches didn't begin until far above, disappearing into a canopy so thick it swallowed the moon. The ground outside the tent was bare soil, gray and cracked, threaded with roots as thick as pipes. The air smelled wrong. Not pine. Something older, like damp stone and rotting bark. Leah's voice trembled. "That's not our campsite." Mark felt his stomach turn. Their fire pit was gone. The moss was gone. Even the slope of the clearing had changed. The ground outside lay perfectly flat, stretching into a dense forest that looked centuries older than the one they'd hiked through. "Maybe we're looking the wrong direction," Mark said weakly. Leah pointed. "Our packs." They sat exactly where they had left them, but they now rested on gray dirt instead of moss. Neither of them moved for a long moment. The cold air pouring through the open tent door carried a distant sound. A low creaking, not wood bending, something heavier shifting. Mark leaned closer to the opening. The forest beyond was unnaturally still. Even the leaves didn't move. But the roots on the ground, he frowned. They were slowly sliding. Not writhing, not crawling. just repositioning themselves through the soil like muscles under skin. "Do you see that?" he whispered. Leah nodded, pale. A root the width of Mark's arm pushed upward through the dirt several feet away, cracking the surface like a bone emerging from flesh. Twisted slowly, then settled again. The creaking sound returned. Deeper in the forest, something moved between the trunks. A shape tall and narrow, too thin for a person, passed behind one tree, then another. Mark felt a wave of cold spread through his chest. "Zip it closed," Leah whispered urgently. He reached for the zipper, but the teeth wouldn't catch. The fabric had stretched. Or maybe the door opening had grown wider than it should have. "Come on," he muttered. Behind them, the tent wall rustled. Both of them froze. The sound came again. Soft brushing, like fingers running along nylon. Leah turned slowly. The back wall of the tent bulged inward. Something outside pressed against it. Not hard, just enough to distort the fabric. A long shape slid across the wall, leaving a faint streak of moisture. Then another. Mark whispered, "Tree branches." Leah shook her head. There weren't trees that close. Outside the door, the forest creaked again. Another root pushed up through the soil. This one rose higher, higher, until it stood nearly vertical. Then it bent, not like wood, like a joint. Mark's throat went dry. That's not a root. The shape behind the tent wall moved again. This time it tapped the nylon. 3 soft knocks. Tap, tap, tap. From deeper in the forest, something answered. A faint echo of the same rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. Leah grabbed Mark's arm. "They're talking." The ground near the tent shifted. Dirt lifted. Roots slid aside. Something large was moving beneath the soil. Mark finally yanked the zipper harder. The door sealed halfway. The fabric snapped tight. But as the opening narrowed, the forest outside changed again. The massive black trees leaned closer. Not falling, watching. And between them, dozens of thin shapes now stood motionless among the roots. Tall, jointed. Their bodies looked like twisted trunks, but their upper halves bent in angles too precise to be natural. One of them tilted slowly, toward the tent. Leah's voice cracked. They weren't there before. Mark forced the zipper the last inch closed. The tent sealed shut. Silence returned. Inside, the air warmed slightly. Neither of them moved. Minutes passed. Then Leah whispered, "Maybe it was just the angle." Mark nodded automatically. "Yeah." They both knew it wasn't. Finally, Mark crawled forward again. "Just going to check," he said. He slowly unzipped the door. Zip. Cold air rushed in. He pulled the flap aside. The familiar campsite lay outside. Spruce trees, mossy ground, their fire pit, moonlight shining exactly where it had before. Mark exhaled shakily. "See." Leah leaned beside him. Relief washed across her face. "It's back." But something tugged at Mark's mind. He stared at the ground just outside the tent. The moss looked normal, but it wasn't flat anymore. Thin ridges ran through it in long, winding lines, like something massive had moved beneath it. Leah noticed it too. "What are those?" Mark didn't answer, because from somewhere deep under the soil, something knocked. Soft, patient. Tap, tap, tap. And a moment later, very faintly, the tent zipper began to move again. The forest road ended miles back, dissolving into a narrow trail that wound through dense spruce and hemlock. By the time Daniel and Marissa reached the clearing, the sky had already turned the deep blue of early night. They pitched their tent near a ring of stones someone had once used as a fire pit. The ground was soft with needles, the air cool and damp with the smell of pine sap and distant water. Daniel struck a lighter. The fire caught slowly, flames licking at the dry twigs before rising into a steady glow. Orange light spilled across the clearing and climbed the trunks of the surrounding trees. Beyond that circle of light, the forest was black. "Last campsite for miles," Daniel said, settling onto a log. Marissa pulled her jacket tighter. You checked that, right? Trail maps said so. No roads, no signal. She checked her phone anyway. No bars. The fire popped. Somewhere deeper in the forest, a branch cracked. Marissa glanced into the dark automatically, but the sound faded quickly into the endless quiet. You hear that? She asked. Deer, probably. He tossed another stick into the flames. They ate quietly. Dehydrated noodles from metal cups, watching sparks spiral upward into the branches overhead. The canopy was thick enough that only thin shards of moonlight slipped through. Daniel leaned back on his elbows, staring upward. That's when he saw it. Something pale sliding across the treetops. He blinked. For a second, it looked like a long shape stretched across several branches. Too smooth, too light in color to be bark or limb. Then it was gone. Did you see that? He asked. Marissa looked up. What? Something up there. She squinted into the darkness above the firelight. The branches swayed slightly in the night breeze. I don't see anything. Daniel shrugged. Probably just a branch moving. The fire cracked loudly, sending a burst of sparks upward. They watched them drift into the canopy and vanish. For a while, neither of them spoke. The forest had that strange stillness remote places develop after dark. A quiet that seemed thicker than silence. Eventually Marissa said, Listen. Daniel tilted his head. First he heard nothing. Then something soft brushed through the branches above them. Not wind exactly. More like a slow shifting weight. The upper limbs bent slightly, leaves whispering against each other. Daniel leaned back again. And there it was. A pale figure crawled across the treetops, moving silently above them. He sat upright instantly. What is that? Marissa turned. Where? There. The firelight flickered, making shadows climb the trunks. High above, something long and thin stretched between two branches. It moved again. Smooth, deliberate. Its body seemed too long for the space between trees, folding and extending like a jointed limb. Marissa whispered, That's not a branch. They both stared upward. The pale shape slid along the canopy without making a sound. Branches dipped under its weight but didn't snap. Its movement was strangely controlled, like a spider gliding along invisible threads. Daniel forced a laugh. Probably a big raccoon or something. Raccoons don't look like that. He couldn't argue. The shape paused directly above the clearing. For a moment it hung there between branches, pale against the dark canopy. Then it continued moving. Within seconds it disappeared into the trees. The branches slowly lifted back into place. The forest fell quiet again. Marissa rubbed her arms. That was weird. Daniel nodded. Maybe a fissure or, I don't know. They both knew they were guessing. The fire burned lower. Cold air crept across the clearing. Eventually they doused the flames and crawled into the tent. The nylon walls rustled softly as they settled into their sleeping bags. Outside, the forest creaked occasionally, old trunks shifting, distant branches tapping. Daniel lay on his back, staring at the dim outline of the tent roof. You still thinking about that thing? Marissa asked. A little. You think it was an animal? I mean, what else would it be? She didn't answer. Minutes passed. The cold seeped slowly through the ground sheet. Then something moved above them. A faint brushing sound slid across the tent roof. Daniel stiffened. Marissa whispered, Did you hear that? Yeah. They both listened. Another soft movement. The nylon ceiling dipped slightly, like something dragging gently across it. Daniel held his breath. The weight shifted from one side of the tent to the other. Not heavy, but deliberate. The sound stopped. After a long moment Daniel whispered, Probably a branch. There weren't branches over us. He didn't reply. Eventually the forest noises returned. Small sounds blending together into something almost normal. They must have fallen asleep. Because Daniel woke later to the sound of wood bending. He opened his eyes. The tent was darker now. The moon had moved behind clouds. Marissa, he whispered. She stirred. Listen. A branch above them creaked slowly. Another one answered. The sounds moved across the canopy. Not falling, just bending, like something large was shifting its weight from tree to tree. Marissa unzipped the tent door an inch. Cold night air poured inside. She tilted her head back. Daniel followed her gaze. At first he saw nothing. Then the branches far above dipped again, and something pale slid between them. The figure moved smoothly across the treetops, its long limbs folding and extending in slow arcs. It didn't look down. It didn't make a sound. But the branches bowed under its passing. Marissa whispered, "It's the same thing." The shape crossed directly above the tent. For a second its pale surface caught a faint line of moonlight. Daniel thought he saw several jointed limbs moving at once. Then the clouds shifted. Darkness swallowed it. The branches slowly straightened. Neither of them closed the tent flap. They sat there listening to the forest breathe. Minutes passed. Then somewhere deeper in the woods, branches bent again. The movement traveled through the canopy like a slow ripple. Tree after tree dipping under unseen weight. Coming closer. Marissa finally whispered, "Maybe we should leave." Daniel nodded, but neither of them moved. Because above them, somewhere just beyond the darkness, a branch lowered slowly toward the tent roof, and something pale shifted across it. Waiting, silent, still moving through the trees.